Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at and installing a set of 1000cc fuel injector clinic fuel injectors for 1986 to 2017 Mustangs. These are 1000cc saturated high impedance fuel injectors, and they're really going to be for anyone who needs more fuel, whether it be for a naturally aspirated build, a nitrous build, or a boosted build. These are E85 compatible and they're sold as a set of 8. They cost $700 and they're easy to get installed. I'll call it a 2 out of 3 wrenches in the difficulty meter. These are tested and rated at 43.5 psi with a 90° Fahrenheit fuel temperature. They also have a lifetime warranty on them. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get these installed on the car. For this install, I used a 3/8 drive cordless impact gun, a short extension, a 17mm socket, but that might change depending on your specific strut tower brace hardware, a 10mm socket, and you'll need a flathead screwdriver. Alright guys, to start the install, we're going to remove our strut tower brace. We are going to leave the battery cable connected. You can remove it if you want to, but you can sneak the strut tower brace out from underneath of it without removing it. And your hardware size is going to depend on what strut tower brace you have. We have 17mm nuts on here. So we'll go ahead, I'm going to pull this plastic piece off, and I'm going to remove this nut. Alright, now you can lift off the strut tower brace. And now we can lift the engine cover off. This is just going to pop out of place. So now we're going to move all of the lines out of the way here, and these just slide off. Next, we're going to get a 10mm socket, and we're going to undo the 2 nuts that are holding our bracket in place here. Alright, we're going to do the same thing on this side. We have 1 line to move. Grab a 10mm socket, undo these 2 nuts here. We'll pull our bracket off. And then the foam underneath. Now we're going to disconnect the electrical connection on the injectors. After that, we're going to unbolt the fuel rail. There are 2 10mm bolts on either side of the fuel rail that are holding it in place. So right now, like I said, I'm going to go ahead, disconnect each injector on this side. You'll squeeze the tab and then just pull back and it'll disconnect for you. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we'll go ahead, disconnect our injectors. And then unbolt the fuel rail. You're going to want to have a couple of rags handy because you can expect a little bit of fuel spill here. So the way that this disconnects is you're going to reach around the bottom here. There are 2 tabs on the blue plastic piece. You'll squeeze them together and push up. And once this releases, you'll be able to pull the black line back. So I'm going to cover that with a rag now because, like I said, we are expecting a little bit of a fuel spill here. At this point, we're disconnected. We have a little bit of gas spilling, but it's okay because we have our rags. So now we're going to pull the fuel rail out, hopefully with the fuel injectors. Some fuel injectors may stay in the manifold. That's okay. Just know that what you're going to do is you're just going to try to wiggle this out of place and you feel each injector pop out of the manifold. I'm going to keep a rag over this end though, just so we don't have any major fuel leaks. I'm going to go around and disconnect the other side. So I'm hoping that the injectors actually stay in the fuel rail, so I'm actually reaching down and grabbing the injectors and helping to pull them out of the manifold so that they don't disconnect from the fuel rail. From here, we're actually ready to lift everything out of the car. I'm just going to cover the open end of the fuel rail so we don't have any major fuel leaks. So at this point, the first thing that I'm going to check for is actually the O-rings on our stock injectors. I'm making sure that the stock injectors came out with all of the O-rings still intact. I want to make sure none of the O-rings are stuck in the manifold at this point. So this right here is your O-ring. Like I said, you just want to make sure that all of the O-rings are still intact on your stock injectors. So the next step is actually going to be to remove these clips right here that are holding your stock injectors in place. For that, we're going to use a flathead screwdriver. I'm just going to wiggle the flathead screwdriver behind the clip here and work it off of the fuel rail. Now we're going to pull the injectors out of the fuel rail. Once again, I'm going to wrap each injector in a rag just in case there's any fuel in there. And we're also going to want to make sure that each O-ring stays on the injector, and if not, we'll have to get it out of the fuel rail before we install our new injectors. So I'm just grabbing the injector and I'm kind of wiggling it out of place and it'll pop out of the fuel rail. Check to make sure the O-ring's on there. We're good to go. So I'm going to do the next one. Alright guys, so now we're going to grab our new injectors and actually get them in place before we move over to the other side. Now it's not a huge deal if you don't have the correct orientation, but I am just mindful of the orientation in which the stock injectors came out, and I'm putting the new injectors in the same orientation. So these are just going to wiggle into place and sit right in the fuel rail. All right, now we'll grab our clips, and these are just going to slide right back over the bottom of the injector and onto the fuel rail. So we'll go ahead and pull our stock injectors out of the other side. All right, so we'll wiggle our new injectors in place. Once again, just being mindful of the orientation. It's not the end of the world if you don't have them in the correct orientation. You can always twist them once they're installed. You guys can see they can fully rotate. It's a little bit harder once you have the clips in place though, so that's why I just like to be mindful of it prior to getting the clips in place. All right, with the ejectors in place, we'll grab our clips. And after this last clip is installed, we're actually ready to get these back in the car. All right, so we're gonna go ahead, get our fuel rail back in place here. Get our injectors lined up right now, that's our main goal. Once we're all lined up, we can go ahead and press down to get the injector seated in the manifold. Kind of like the same feeling as you guys felt when you were putting the injectors in the fuel rail. You want to feel them click into place. We'll go ahead and do that on both sides. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and reconnect our fuel line. So we'll pull the rags out of the way, move the lines out of the way, grab our fuel line. All right, so we'll push the black line back into place and then push the blue clip down. From here, we're going to reconnect our injectors. So we'll just take each plug and plug it right into place. And after we're done with that, we're going to bolt back down the fuel rail. All right, so we'll drop our fuel rail bolts back into place. Get it started by hand. we'll tighten it. All right, so on the other side, we'll do the same thing. We'll plug in all of our injectors. Luckily, the harness is straightforward and you can't really cross these over to the incorrect injector. From here, we'll grab our fuel rail bolts and then get those in place. Once again, we'll start by hand just to make sure we're good to go on our threads. And then we'll tighten them down. All right, now we'll get our foam insulator and our bracket back in place as well. So we're just gonna work this over our fuel rail and wiggle it down into place. Then I'll set the bracket back on top. Tighten down the two 10mm nuts. And then get our line back in place in the bracket. All right, so we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. We are going to move our lines out of the way, get our insulation back over the fuel rail. All right, and if you guys get worried or concerned about accidentally switching sides on these insulation pieces, you don't have to worry too much about it because Ford clearly labels which side's the left side, which side's the right side, and which side goes towards the front, and of course, which side goes towards the rear. So you guys can see there's an L here, as well as an arrow pointing towards the front of the car. Once this is in place, we can go ahead, we'll lay this line down and then we'll get our bracket for the left side in place. Grab our 10mm nuts and tighten those down. And then get our lines back in place. At this point, we're ready to get our engine cover back in place, but one thing I want to say before we really button up the install is that it's always a good idea to just get in the car, cycle through the ignition. You don't even necessarily have to start the car, but if you cycle through and just check and make sure you don't have any fuel leaks. After that's done, and if you guys don't see any fuel leaks, then I would recommend starting the car, just letting it run for a minute. Double check again that you don't have any fuel leaks before buttoning all this stuff up. But at this point, we know we're good to go, so we're going to get our engine cover back in place, followed by our strut tower brace. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this review and install. Keep in mind that you can always check these out more online right here at AmericanMuscle.com.